The mist clung to the fields of Eriador, shrouding the land in an eerie stillness. The lone hoot of an owl was lost in the silence of the night. At the edge of Bucklebury Ferry, the wind whispered through the reeds, ruffling the waters of the Barandwin like a restless spirit. It was here that Camul, second of the nine, halted his steed and stared across the water. The ring was near. He could feel it, a pulse in the fabric of the world, calling out to him, and yet he hesitated. The river lay between him and his quarry, an impassable boundary, an unseen barrier against his pursuit. The Nazgûl, once kings of men, now wraiths enslaved to the will of Sauron, were creatures of fear and shadow, bound to the physical world by the dominion of the One Ring. Their presence alone was enough to drain the courage from mortal hearts, but they themselves were not without limits. Chief among these was their aversion to water, a weakness that, while never explicitly explained in Tolkien's texts, appears as a recurring motif in their movements. In Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien notes that his father nowhere explained the ringwraith's fear of water, yet it was a central factor in Sauron's strategy, as seen in his assault on Osgiliath. The need for the Nazgûl to cross the Anduin was a primary reason for this attack, ensuring that the wraiths could reach the western lands. This weakness, however, was not absolute. The Nazgûl were capable of crossing water when necessary, provided they did not do so unaided. They could be ferried across in boats or use structures like bridges and fords, but they did not willingly wade into the currents. This reluctance was not due to physical limitation. Being wraiths, they had no solid bodies to be swept away by the tide, but rather to something deeper, something that hinted at an inherent incompatibility between their nature and the waters of Middle-earth. One possible explanation for this aversion is found in the association between water and purity in Tolkien's legendarium. Throughout his works, bodies of water often serve as barriers against darkness. The ford of Bruinan, which swept away the Nine when they pursued Frodo, was imbued with elvish power by Elrond, forming a divine safeguard against the forces of Mordor. The Anduin itself, though not explicitly enchanted, seemed to dull the perception of the wraiths, as Camul was said to have lost his sense of the ring's movement once it had crossed the river. Even the Barandwin, Brandywine, posed an obstacle, suggesting that certain waters, particularly those near elven lands, carried an inherent resistance to their dark presence. Yet another explanation may lie in their spectral nature. The Nazgûl existed in a state between the seen and the unseen, neither fully corporeal nor entirely immaterial. Water, a substance that exists in constant movement, shifting and shaping itself to its environment, might represent a force that disrupts their tenuous grasp on the physical world. The fact is, just as wraiths rely on their cloaks and forms to interact with the world of the living, immersion in water might temporarily weaken their ability to manifest, making them vulnerable or diminishing their power. Even so, Tolkien himself admitted the difficulty in sustaining this idea consistently. The Nazgûl crossed many rivers throughout The Lord of the Rings, often without detailed explanation. The Grey Flood Gwathloth was one such example, where there was only a dangerous ford formed by the ruins of the bridge, and yet they still managed to continue their pursuit. This suggests that while water presented an obstacle, it was not an insurmountable one. Rather, it was a hindrance that could be overcome with aid or necessity. At Osgiliath, the Witch King himself led the charge, using his terrifying presence to drive the defenders into chaos. His goal was not only to break Gondor's hold on the city, but to establish a crossing point for the Nazgûl. This necessity illustrates that, while the ringwraiths could traverse water under certain conditions, it was not their preferred mode of movement, and they required strategic planning to do so. This inherent aversion to water also fits within the broader themes of Middle-earth mythology. Sauron and his master Morgoth had long been at odds with Ulmo, the Valar of Waters, who often acted as an unseen force guiding the free peoples against the darkness. Ulmo's influence extended through the rivers and seas of Arda, and it is possible that the waters of Middle-earth retained a residual resistance against the servants of Morgoth and Sauron. If this were true, then water itself was a realm where the will of the Dark Lord held little sway, a natural counterforce to his dominion. Even within the cultural memory of Middle-earth, water played a role in resisting the encroachment of evil. Númenor, before its downfall, was a land blessed by the sea, and its mariners were among the greatest in Arda. The downfall of Númenor, caused by Sauron's deception, came in the form of a great flood, an act of divine intervention that shattered his ambitions. While Sauron himself survived, his hatred of the sea may have passed to his servants, manifesting as their reluctance to cross waters without aid. And so Camul hesitated at the banks of the Baranduin, the dark waters gleaming beneath the moonlight. The ring was close, but the river lay between him and his prize. Across the water, Frodo and his companions pressed forward, oblivious to the reprieve granted by the river's silent resistance. The hunt would continue, but for now, the Nazgûl could go no further. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp earth and wet reeds to the unseen face of the Nazgûl. The moments stretched, and still Camul made no move to enter the waters of the Baranduin. His steed, a dark beast bred in the deep pits of Mordor, stamped the ground in frustration. But even it would not step forward. There was no enchantment here, no great flood called forth by elvish incantations, no wrath of Ulmo stirring the depths. But still, the water itself seemed to deny them passage. This was not the first time, nor would it be the last, that the Nazgûl found themselves checked by such barriers. The most dramatic of these instances occurred at the ford of Bruinen, where Elrond and Gandalf unleashed the fury of the river, sweeping away the Nine in a foaming torrent. The flood, shaped by the will of the elves, took on forms of white horses. An echo of Ulmo's dominion, perhaps, or simply a reflection of elven mastery over water. Regardless of the cause, the result was the same. The wraiths, stripped of their mounts and hurled downstream, were forced to retreat and reform. Unable to press their pursuit, this incident alone might suggest that the Nazgûl feared only enchanted waters, but their behavior elsewhere contradicts this notion. During their hunt for the ring, they avoided crossing even lesser rivers unless forced to do so. In Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien explains that they were reluctant to cross the Anduin after the company of the ring passed through. Camul, the chief tracker, lost all sense of the ring's presence once it crossed the river, as if the water itself obscured its call. This suggests that their aversion to water was more than mere superstition or inconvenience. It was a real hindrance to their perception and movement in the world. Their limitations extended even to the great war between Sauron and Gondor. The attack on Osgiliath in 3018 of the Third Age was not only a strategic blow against the city, but also a necessary step in allowing the Nazgûl to cross the Anduin. Until the bridge was taken, they were unable to pass, despite their power. This was not an instance of a magically enchanted river barring them. It was a practical limitation tied to their very nature. They could not simply wade into the current and ride across, as mortal men might. They needed a structured means of passage. Why then did water pose such a challenge to them? Some have speculated that it was a consequence of their spectral state. As beings who existed partially in the unseen realm, the physical world was, in some ways, alien to them. Solid ground offered stability, a connection to the land of the living, while water, ever-changing, shifting, and formless, was anathema to their nature. They required firm footing to maintain their presence, and immersion in flowing water might have threatened to unbind them, at least temporarily. This would explain why they relied so heavily on their black horses and later on the winged fell beasts. The horses, though living creatures, were utterly enslaved to their will, allowing them to maintain their dominion over the physical world. But when these were swept away at Bruinen, the wraiths were left powerless, reduced to mere shadows, until they could be resupplied with new mounts from Mordor. Doma had been wraiths 7,600 years ago, but she was soon to dry out again. This vulnerability was a rare moment of weakness in their otherwise relentless pursuit. Another possibility is that water, in Tolkien's mythos, often represented forces beyond the reach of Morgoth and Sauron. From the earliest days of Arda, Ulmo, the Valar of the seas and rivers, had remained independent, resisting the corruption of the Dark Lords. In the Silmarillion, Ulmo alone of the Valar refused to abandon Middle-earth after the exile of the Noldor, continuing to guide and aid the free peoples where he could. His power flowed through the waters of Arda, and though not every stream or lake bore his direct influence, there was a lingering sense that water remained apart from the dominion of evil. It is no coincidence that some of the greatest moments of divine intervention in Middle-earth's history involved water. The downfall of Numenor came in the form of a great flood, erasing the corrupted realm of Ar-Pharazôn from existence. The escape of Tuor, one of Gondolin's last survivors, was guided by Ulmo's hand, leading him along the hidden paths of Sirion to safety. Even the destruction of Sauron's first stronghold, Tolin Gawroth, was aided by the forces of water, as the Isle of Werewolves was submerged after the defeat of its master, Sauron. This persistent theme suggests that the Ringwraith's reluctance to cross water was more than just a tactical limitation. It was a fundamental truth of Middle-earth. The rivers, the seas, and even the rain itself were beyond the reach of the shadow, resistant to its corruption. While the Nazgûl could cross with assistance, they could not do so freely. Water was a boundary between their world and the world of the living, a natural ward against their presence. As Camul turned his hooded head toward the distant lights of Bucklebury, the frustration in his being was almost tangible. The ring was there, he could feel it, just beyond his reach. And yet, he could do nothing but retreat, to find another way, to hunt anew. The Barandwin, dark and slow-moving, had defied him, not through enchantment or force, but through the quiet, unyielding truth of water itself. And so the wraith turned, vanishing into the mist once more. The hunt delayed, but not abandoned. The waters of Middle-earth had held back the shadow for another night, but the darkness would rise again, undeterred, unrelenting. The Nine would find another path. They always did.